Hey, all, this is Jake here. We'll just wait a minute for people to sort of come into the stream. We'll get started in another half a minute or so here. All right, let's get started. There's just so many virtual connections these days. I'm really thankful that we're able to connect in so many different ways. It's pretty amazing. But my name is Jake Laverne. I'm the Senior Director of Product at DigitalOcean here. And I'm happy to be here sharing key tips on how to turn your idea into a product that your target customer will love. So in the coming weeks, I'll put together a little bit more in-depth talk around this. And you can register for that talk by clicking on the link in the description. And DigitalOcean also has an awesome playlist filled with other community tutorials. So make sure to check those out as well. But today I really wanted to touch on three key tips or three helpful tips that you can use when you're first getting started building a minimum viable product, right? We're going to talk a little bit about ways that you can make sure that you're building the right thing for your target customer. And I'll go into lots of details in the talk, but maybe just three key points to touch on today. So first point is to always work on the next riskiest thing. So a lot of times we might feel like the thing we want to work on is the hardest thing, the thing that's going to take the longest, maybe the most interesting thing. And what I'm here to say is if you're trying to build a product that your customers will love, you've got to work on the next riskiest thing. And so how do you know what the next riskiest thing is? That's really up to you to decide. I mean, nobody else can tell you that. That's going to come from your experience, your intuition, your work in the space that you're in, and your work with users and customers around the product. But just to give some examples, maybe the next riskiest thing for the product that you're working on is how you're going to make money. A lot of times we hear the folklore of, you build something amazing first, and then 10 steps later, you're going to figure out how to monetize it. Well, I think most of the successful product innovation that I've seen has a plan for revenue generation, for monetization early on. And even though it might not seem like that from the outside, from the inside, I can tell you that's often a day one thought. And so if the next riskiest thing is, how am I going to make money off of this? You really got to dig into that. You might want to dig into that while putting on hold all sorts of other work and exploration, right? So you can find out people's willingness to pay for a product just by putting together a teaser video, or creating a sign-up page, collecting prepayment or credit cards ahead of time. So that's just one example of focusing on the next riskiest thing, even though it might not feel like the hardest thing or the most challenging thing to work on. And maybe point number two related to that point is the next riskiest thing is only rarely technology related. I mean, especially if you're like myself, technologist at heart, it might always feel like the thing to work on is technology related, trying to solve the hard problems or trying to find the right existing technology to fit into your solution. But it's very rare that technology is the next riskiest thing. And so if you feel like you're going down a path of really digging in on technology, I just ask you to pause and ask yourself whether or not that actually is the next riskiest thing. And I see Eddie chiming in. My 2 cents, the project needs to be open source. Yeah, in general, at DigitalOcean, we love open source projects. We make heavy use and also try to contribute heavily back. And I agree. So it's a good way to de-risk some of the technology rather than build everything yourself. And then maybe a third point, just in terms of trying to get to an MLP, it's to know whether your users and your customers are two different groups. And we just pause there for a second. Users are the people who are going to use your product or who are currently using your product. Customers are the people who are paying for your product. And sometimes they may be the same person. And sort of the most obvious and straightforward businesses, you're building something, a product that you're going to sell to customers that are going to pay you for it. But if you're having challenges, you're trying to think through business models, I just encourage you to think about whether you might have a business model in hand that where your users and your customers are two different folks. The people who are going to use the product are not the people who are going to pay you. And there are a ton of examples out there in the world, and we can look at most of Google's consumer products or consumer software products. As users, we often don't pay for those products, and Google knows that their customers for those products are actually the advertisers that that are generating revenue for them. And so, lots of examples of this. One classic example is enterprise software. If you're building enterprise software, it very likely is the case that the people who will use your software are not the people who are going to pay for it. And the point there really is to make sure that you're treating those two groups as distinct, and they might both have needs and requirements that you need to satisfy, but treat them as different ones. Certainly, you don't want to confuse your customers who are paying for your service as being the ones who are going to drive the requirements for your users. You've got to talk to both of them. You've got to build the best product for your users. You've got to meet the requirements of your paying customers, and that balance can actually unlock a lot when you're developing new products. It can unlock entirely new business models. So just 3 points that I wanted to hit on quickly today. It'll be part of a larger talk that I'll be going over in a few weeks, but always work on the next riskiest thing. It's very rarely the case that the next riskiest thing is technology. And you should know whether your users and your customers are the same group or two distinct groups, and you should treat them distinctly if they are separate. So now I'll see if there are any questions popping up in the chat, any comments, including customers in the journey of the project. Agree completely. Yes. So for a lot of the areas of risk, the biggest risk that I found in my career in product is that you're building something that doesn't serve the needs of a given user segment or a given set of customers. And so that's the biggest way to de-risk that is to include customers in your journey from day one. And so you want to get as quickly as you can to customer interaction. See if there are any other thoughts coming up. Maybe not right now, but again, I'm excited for a deeper dive into these topics in a few weeks. Thank you so much for joining us today. Wait, yeah, here we go. I see a couple of comments coming in. Is there an online Canvas tool that you would recommend? Yeah, if we're talking about, I guess it depends on what we mean by Canvas, but if we're talking about like a business Canvas or a lean Canvas type of tool, so one I just love to use, there is a book by Ash Maurya, Running Lean. It's sort of takes off on Eric Ries's Lean Startup book. And in there's a great lean canvas. It's not really a tool, it's just a paper canvas, but I love using that paper canvas. And Ash Maurya does have an online version of that tool. If we're talking about, somebody chimed in with Miro, if we're talking about an infinite canvas, like a tool for doing virtual brainstorming collaboration, yes, Miro is a great tool. We use at DigitalOcean, Mural, M-U-R-A-L. So Miro, the first one, M-I-R-O, and Mural, M-U-R-A-L, the second one, are both great tools that we use for online whiteboarding and collaboration. How do we do market research? That's a great topic, a pretty deep one. We'll dig into that in more detail in a few weeks. I think maybe the first thing I'll say is market research, like usability testing, a little is infinitely better than none. And so I would suggest that that what you do is just dive in. There are a lot of great posts and articles. I'll share a few of them in the coming weeks about how to do market research, but mostly like usability testing, it involves talking to and surveying customers. At first, you might need to look at some secondary research. So some of the broad papers that are published by analysts, news stories, things that are going to help you get a sense for an overall market, but nothing beats direct conversations and surveys to potential target customers. Again, like usability testing, just get started. A little bit of market research is infinitely better than none. Sponsor donation or paid subscription. Actually, I think I missed a topic earlier, but I'll get to it. Sponsor donation or paid subscription, which one is good for individual contributed project? It's really interesting. I think if we're talking about a project like an open source project and trying to figure out whether to get sponsorship or donation, I think that, we see a lot of options popping up these days for donation, everything from GitHub's donate capability that they've got built into the platform now. There are several other tools like Patreon for getting donations, but in a lot of the conversations that we've been having with open source developers, I think they're having a tough time getting enough funding purely through donations in order to sustain 100% attention to an open source project. And so we're looking at whether there are things that we can do with our marketplace and as DigitalOcean to help open source developers, but no announcements there yet. But sponsorship, if you can get it, does provide a little bit more of a steady and reliable ability to work on a project. Somebody also mentioned Open Collective as well, which is a great resource. Maybe looking up one of the questions above, quick question for products that are less than $10, right? I think maybe the question is like, how do you do your market research? I see the two are tied together. So for lower cost products, especially if they're going to be consumer focused, a good thing to do, you can tap into some of the tools that are out there that'll get you a panel of users. So there's usertesting.com. There are a few other tools you can Google around, but I think it's pretty good, again, just to get quick and dirty testing going rather than nothing at all. What's the next step after building an MVP? What if your MVP has a big architecture and scalability issue and maybe your company can't afford a rewrite? This happens a lot. I've been in at least 3 different circumstances where we had an MVP and we had significant architectural issues in between us and the next version. The natural inclination for sure is to rewrite. It just feels good, right? I mean, having been a practicing software engineer, even though I'm not anymore, I know that feeling of wanting to be able to get a clean start. I think the best that I've seen examples of this are to treat even architectural overhauls like incremental projects where you can deliver incremental business value. So the question is, can you think about something instead of being a big rewrite to get from MVP to the next step? Can you instead think about the same sort of agile incremental approach to architecture, right? So if you're able to break apart your system, for example, I mean, the last major piece of SaaS software that I worked on, we had a monolithic application. We needed to break it apart into microservices rather than try and do a complete re-architecture into dozens of microservices. We started with just one split front end and back end, and then we took that back end and split it just into an identity service and the rest of the back end. And so the question is whether you can do those architectural shifts incrementally as well. And then, not sure if it's a question for me, any insight on a data center coming to Switzerland? I don't have any insight right now. Maybe not the best person on that front, but we're always opening new data centers. Just opened up an additional data center in San Francisco. And so keep your eyes open, but I don't know of any details of a next data center. All right, this was great. I was glad to see so many questions coming in. So, again, I'll kind of remind folks, make sure you register for the upcoming talk in the description. We'll go into more detail on a lot of these questions. These questions will help shape what I focus on in that talk as well. There's also a ton of community videos from industry experts on the DigitalOcean YouTube channel, which is also linked in the description. So be sure to subscribe and stay up to date. Thanks again for everybody, and thanks for all the questions. Hope I get to see you all virtually again in a few weeks.